Recently, I got a rather unique view of the American criminal justice system from a man who transformed his prison time into prize-winning poetry, even became a presidential appointee on juvenile delinquency. His name is Reginald Dwayne Betts. His latest book is Bastards of the Reagan Era. He joined me from Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut. Here's some of that conversation. Why would an honor student get involved in multiple felonies?
I don't know. I think that's a difficult question. That's the question that I've been dealing with probably since I committed the crime. The easiest answer is just that I came up in a community where, it was one of the options that was available to me. And you sort of hope that you avoid the worst things that you could actually possibly do. And for me, I did for the most part. And then one night I was hanging with some people who were older than me, and somebody had an idea, and for whatever reason, I ran with it.
What changed you? Did your change occur in prison?
Well, I think it did. I mean, part of it, too, is that I never expected to go to prison. And I think I should sort of be clear about that. I thought I would go to college. And I looked around me, and I did see some people getting in trouble. Some of my friends were, murdered. Some people were going to prison. But I just didn't expect that for myself. And in fact, in some ways, I thought myself better than my peers who I expected to end up in prison or to end up in trouble. And so when I went to prison so young and really earlier than most of the people who I hung around, I knew that I was mistaken and I was no different from everyone else. And I decided that at that point that I wanted to commit myself to being, what I always claimed I could be, which was, a college graduate. Decided to be a writer. Wanted to commit myself to becoming a writer, and to sort of just commit myself to making my family proud of me, as opposed to the shame that comes with, pleading guilty to carjacking.
Now, the President Obama appointed you to the Coordinating Council on Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. How'd that come about?
I actually don't know. It's one of those things where you just get a phone call and you get an opportunity really to just meet with a bunch of people in government who are working on these juvenile justice issues and provide some input and some perspective from somebody who went through the system. But they have 4 to 6 practitioner members, and they're usually sitting judges or ex-judges or people who work in juvenile justice and have been working there for years. And I just became the individual that they asked to be a part of the group who had some experience with the system.
In that area, how is the president doing?
I think the president is doing great. I think right now we're struggling to get the OJJDP, the act, reauthorized. And but I think the president is doing well. I think you had a lot of movement, not as much around the juvenile issues as you like to see, but that's in part because it's really an issue for the state. So you deal with raise the age in North Carolina, you deal with raise the age in New Orleans, you deal with slowing down the number of juveniles to get tried as adults in really every state in the country. And those tend to be state issues as opposed to federal issues.
Obama was the first sitting president to visit a federal prison. What did you make of that?
Yeah, I thought it was great because he was the first sitting president to visit a federal prison. But again, I think the issues sort of reside in the states. And so for me, it would have been great if had he visited, or in some point in the future, if he visits a state facility, if he looks at the prison sentences and not just sort of cabining the discussion of nonviolent offenders, because that happens a lot. I think you can have a real rich discussion about how juveniles get treated in the adult criminal system, but also how long people are being sent to prison. I faced life at 16. And frankly, I pled guilty to the charge. I stood in front of the judge. I had no guarantee of how much time I would be sentenced to. And had he sentenced me to 25 years, I would still be in prison now. And so I think we have to ask serious questions about the sort of human capital that's being wasted because of the decisions that happen.
Well, President Clinton, I think, has admitted he was wrong in signing the federal sentencing rules, right?
Yes.
That was a mistake to have locked in sentences.
Yeah, but again, that's still only part of it. I definitely think that was a mistake, but, my sentence was discretionary. And the question is, why should robbery carry 50 and 60 years? Why should carjacking carry life? I pleaded guilty, I admit my guilt, but no one was physically hurt in my crime, and I could have actually been sentenced to life in prison, and I was only 16 years old. So these are questions that I think aren't really being raised in the discussion of nonviolent drug offenders.
Are you surprised, Dwayne, that the Koch brothers and other hardcore conservatives now are skeptical about the government's ability to solve problems, but they're pushing for prison reform? Are you surprised at that?
I'm not surprised. I think that we just reached the tipping point. And we at the point now where everybody can see that sending so many people to prison is a waste on state and federal budgets.
Someone once told me, a psychologist wrote a book, that the biggest failure in America is the prison system. You agree?
Yeah, well, I mean, I definitely agree, but part of it is that we look at recidivism and we say that the recidivism rate is a product of the person who went to prison and came home. But I know that when I went to prison, I had absolutely no programs that I had access to. The state really wasn't responsible at all for my safety. And so for most people, they go to prison and they become worse, not because prison is like a school for criminals, but they become worse because it's a level of violence and a level of a lack of care that happens in an institution that doesn't allow people to grow past whatever troubles they enter prison with. And so I think prison is a failure just if you consider holding the prisons more accountable for things like the recidivism rates, for things like the failure to get an education, the failure to gather up some skills.
Why is Black Lives Matter a controversial organization?
I don't
understand
I don't think Black Lives Matter. I don't think it is a controversial organization. I think some people might say that it is a controversial organization, but that's less about the organization and more about the inability to confront really what's going on in communities all across the country in terms of policing, in terms of the criminal justice system, in terms of the school systems. I don't think Black Lives Matter is a controversial organization at all.
In 2006, the Washington Post did a profile of you, says that in fourth grade, a teacher gave you the book Gifted Hands, the autobiography of Dr. Ben Carson. Did that book have any impact on you?
Yeah, it did. It's funny. I think if the reporter wrote that review now, wrote the article about me now, she probably wouldn't quote the fact that Ben Carson's book changed my life in some ways. But I think it did. I think you always just look for the possible. And Ben Carson's story really was remarkable in that, you know, his mother couldn't even read and that she was able to inspire him through books just because she pushed him to read. And I think his story is also remarkable given the fact that he made a huge turn from where he might have ended up to where he ultimately came. I think it's sort of sad and tragic that as a presidential candidate, he advances some of the ideas that he advances now, but I can't deny the fact that as a fourth grader, you know, it's one of the books that really, you know, changed my life. Or at least it made me think about the possibilities in a different way.
Your new volume of poetry is titled Bastards of the Reagan Era. Who are we talking about?
I think, so with the title, I'm really talking about young men in my generation, but I'm also talking about the generation just under me. And the book obviously refers to the war on drugs, but I think to a larger degree it refers to the fact that you have a community that has really been abandoned, I think, not just by, you know, absentee fathers, but about a community itself. When I went to prison, I seriously and honestly feel like we were abandoned, and that's why now I get letters from men 35 years old, 40 years old, who really have no support, and they got the similar charges as I do, you know, robbery charge, a carjacking charge, and they recognize that it's a mistake, and they asking where's the conversation about mercy, and they're asking if they should actually rot in prison. And so when I say bastards of the Reagan era, I think in large part I'm talking about people like myself, and I'm talking about men like those who, you know, are still in prison.
Dwayne, a pleasure talking with you. Have a happy new year.
Thank you. Pleasure being on the show.
The book again is Bastards of the Reagan Era. And for more about it and its author, check out Dwayne's Twitter feed @Dwayne Betts.